People talk a lot about the role forests play as a carbon sink, the amount of carbon that the forest can take up over a given year and store in terms of trunk and branches and wood and biomass. And there's a lot of questions about how that will change in the future climates. We know that CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing. Currently, CO2 that I'm breathing around here is in the air that I'm breathing around here, is probably about 390 parts per million. But in the geological past, it was much higher, and before that, much lower than that. And there's a lot of questions about how plant growth will change as CO2 continues to increase in the modern world. So what we see behind me are three greenhouses where we have some plants growing under current ambient air CO2 concentrations. We have other plants growing at CO2 concentrations that were seen in the pre-industrial era. So before we started burning a lot of coal and oil, CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere were much lower than they are today. And so we have plants growing at the concentrations that were seen 200 years ago. We also have one of the greenhouses where we have CO2 concentrations which we predict will be around within 50 years' time. And what we're monitoring is the differences in plant growth across that gradient. How will increasing CO2 change plant growth, how it will change the way they allocate their carbon. So when a plant grows, it fixes carbon to sugars in its leaves, but it then distributes that carbon throughout the whole plant. It can build more bark, it can build more stem, build more roots. And that changes as the environmental conditions change. And so that will have huge implications on how the forest will look and interact with the world in the coming years.